So, um, as far as the trying to scroll it in here, that ain't gonna work. Um, the second paper is due, or the final paper, I guess. Today is. Just give me a second. Um, for you guys, it will be due the 24th of November, so about a month out now. Because after that is Thanksgiving break, and then finals. Yes. No, it's there you can drop one grade overall. So you can either drop like a test grade or a paper grade. So, um, yeah. So if you did the first paper, and you need a test dropped, make sure you do the second paper. If you're doing good grade wise, you don't necessarily have to do the second paper, and then that can just be the one that gets dropped. Because I know you guys are going to have a lot of stuff due around this time. So I'll just drop whatever's lowest, yeah. Or if it actually works out that, like, if I don't drop anything, your grade will be like a point higher or something, I'll just do that. Whatever math works out best for you. Because sometimes it does like that. Because a lot of times people will have like really consistent grades, and if I drop one, sometimes it'll like go down slightly. So it just depends on if that's your situation. But yeah, if you do have like a lowest grade and you did everything, whatever's the lowest will get dropped. Yeah, that's just how I roll. Now that said, since this is a Monday Wednesday class, we do still come back for one day after Thanksgiving. Monday, the 1st of December, is still the last day of class technically for us. Normally I would be like, okay, well, you guys can just turn the paper in that day, but that would give you guys like that whole break that Tuesday, Thursday class wouldn't have. So you guys just turn it in before Thanksgiving break, and that's when I'll try to get them graded. That said, that Monday will just be review for the final. So that's all that. That'll just be when that is. And, for Tuesday, Thursday, theirs will just be that previous. So that'll be their last day of class. Whoops. I can't think of anything else. Any questions from you guys? Okay, we should have enough time. I mean, we should have enough time. We're going to have enough time for at least this test that we're about to have, because we're getting towards the end of chapter 6, and once we finish chapter 6, we have a test. I don't know. This happens pretty often. If we're going to have time for a test 3 before the final, so likely I'll just make test 3 the final, because I mean they all work out the same. So that'll just be how that works. So we don't have to like bust our butts through November trying to get everything in and get another test in, and then also get enough material for the final. Because as I said, I don't do cumulative stuff for the final. Like I get now why professors do that. It's like, okay, you can have your third test, and then now the final is just all of your tests, and that's what your study guide is. I get how that can be easier, but also that's just not how I roll. So that's just what we're gonna do. Yeah, that's all I got. If you guys don't have anything, we'll just move on to the notes. Yank this back over here. Pull that up. Well, maybe not. Oh, that's that. Okay, this over here. There. Okay. Yeah, one of my students in my 103 class asked me about when stuff was due, which
which is the class after you guys, and so I went over all of that, and I'm like, wait, did I actually talk to my first class about it? I don't. So yeah, I wanted to make sure you guys were aware, just kind of where what we were looking at, schedule wise. So, and also like the second paper, it's identical to the first. 2 to 3 pages, double spaced. Give me quotations if you can, and then a works cited page at the end. And the default topic is this chapter, pretty much. Give me an individual or an event during the Revolution, and specifically what they did during the Revolution. So, like, if you want to talk about somebody that we know a lot about, say, like George Washington, I don't want a biography on George Washington. I don't need to know what he did as a kid or what he did as the president. Tell me about what he did during the war. And I say that because, as we're going to see a little bit later on today, there's a lot of people who were involved in the war that we don't really talk about much, like they weren't one of the founding fathers or something, but they had really cool backgrounds and histories involved in the war that would make a decent paper. Again, that's default. You can do whatever else you want to if you feel like it. So anything from early colonial era to, we're probably going to get to the War of 1812. So if you want to, you can go as far as the Civil War if you really want to, but we're probably going to get that far in the notes. All right. So, Declaration of Independence. I talked about how the main thing about the Declaration of Independence is that it was largely a good summarization of these various ideas that had been already talked about and formed out over the course of, honestly, over a century. John Locke had been around for, he was dead by this point. His social contact theory was something that everybody just kind of already knew. Like if you said John Locke, they knew what you meant. So, moving into the next section of the book, we have how the various sides recruited their supporters. So you had some groups that were pretty obvious in where they stood. We had the white servants and black slaves, obviously in Virginia, who worked with the British because the British offered them a better deal. Both sides worked to heavily recruit native allies because while they might have had, the majority of the guns, the natives were the ones that knew the countryside far better than anybody. Even the Americans that had been living in the colonies for perhaps their entire lives, the natives had still been there for generations, so it was still far more familiar to them than some dude that had been living, in a city for a few decades. So the British under Guy Johnson managed to work with the Mohawk tribe under Joseph Brant, or his native name, Thagendag. I don't know. I can't say it. They went with Joseph Brant. Thayendangia. Dangea. I don't know. Continental Congress worked with the some of the Oneida natives, thanks to Samuel Kirkland, but for the most part, the natives preferred to remain neutral because, unlike the English and French conflicts, they saw this as like an internal dispute among English, because it was. And they didn't feel like getting involved to the point of being killed over what was to them a not very important dispute. So, as I've said several times, this was not a everybody in America versus the British. We're all, hoorah, America. There was a fair group, a fair number that were loyalists, those that remained loyal to the British. They typically were in cities like New York, Newport, and Charleston. And while this does kind of imply that they were, the rich merchants, it was across class lines. Many chose to fight for the British because their wealthy landowners chose to fight for independence. So if your landlord, who you have hated your entire life, decides to go one way, you're going to go the other. Because if you win, or your side wins, you're going to get a better deal. And if you fight with your landlord, nothing's going to change. Except if your side loses, you might be in a worse shape than you already were under your awful parasitic landlord. A fair group of natives did work with the British as well down in the south. We had the Mohawk, Seneca, and Cayuga in the north, and Cherokee and Creek in the south, who did work with the British to some degree because they had some level of deals with the British to keep the colonists from encroaching further into native lands. I mean, we'd seen the Proclamation Line to keep the colonists from pushing past the Appalachians. And if the colonists won their independence, all these deals would be null and void. And boy howdy, the natives were correct about that, because as soon as we won this thing, we were all about pushing the natives out of their land and or genocide. And the civilians who were loyal to the British Crown were very much caught in the middle. If the Patriot military came in and took cities, they were not above hurting civilians. They were not above either shooting them in the street or just like exiling them to the wilderness, which was just a slower death. This included women and children. You'll often see if you watch any of the more modern movies about this era, it's always, the British were so terrible to the Patriot civilians, even though they were technically, doing treason. But you never see the other side, where the Patriots coming into loyalist towns would do the exact same thing, because we were all English, and we all did the same thing to people. It didn't matter. So here you have some folks on the frontier fighting off the British, using not exactly standing in line tactics. I should also mention, I believe I brought this up before, but just to say again, the percentage of people in the colonies who actually supported the war was about a third. It was about 30% who supported the war, 30% who worked with the British, and then another 30% who wanted just to sit it out entirely. So this was not again, I've already said, everybody in America is all against the British. And it wasn't even like a majority. It wasn't even 50-50. It was like 30% were fighting against the British, 30% were working with the British, and another 30 just didn't want to get involved. So while we did have the natives, of course, who wanted to maintain neutrality, the British and the Americans weren't especially kind to them. When the British came through, they would often be pushed aside. When the Patriots came through, we're really good at murdering natives who have surrendered or have raised a flag of truce or neutrality. We've been good at that since, before the country started. So, in 1777, American soldiers killed the Swanee Chief Cornstalk under a flag of truce because he wasn't joining us. So, we just murdered him. Good old war crime there. And any colonists who tried to maintain neutrality had issues from both sides. For example, Quakers, Mennonites, Amish, Shakers, and Moravians try to maintain neutrality out of moral and religious convictions. Will be fined for refusing to pledge allegiance to the new state governments. Specifically, in June of 1778, 9 Mennonite farmers were jailed in Pennsylvania, refusing to take an oath of allegiance, and then their property and assets were sold, which meant their families were left destitute, which meant that for refusing to sign an oath of allegiance, not only did these men go to jail, but their families were basically left homeless. Yep, fighting for freedom, guys. But you know, you gotta swear an oath of allegiance to this new country we're making. Now that said, these groups that wish to maintain neutrality were really serious about maintaining neutrality. So if you were a member of these groups, say the Quakers here, you'd be kicked out if you joined one side or the other. So in this case, one of the folks we're most familiar with, Betsy Ross, who's known for sewing flags for the rebellion. I was going to say revolution, it's all the same. And her husband, who actually joined in entirely, they were kicked out of their Quaker community, which, you know, is certainly not as bad as the government taking all your stuff and leaving you to starve in the streets. But, you know, they could no longer be part of their religious community, which is still a pretty big deal. So here's American diplomacy when it comes to Native Americans. This is something we'll see a little bit later. Quaker lady detaining English general. This is I'll get to this more later. We'll leave that as it is for the moment. And then of course Betsy Ross doing her thing. Another of the more mythicized parts of the revolution. I don't know if they were able to make flags quite that large with any amount of speed. All right. And then, of course, the other third were those who decided to go for the whole independence thing. However, after the Declaration, actually committing independence became more dangerous because now it was not just some rowdy guys fighting back against the British, which, as I've said several times, was common among the British Empire. Now, if the rebellion failed, anyone that was seen as working against the crown was seen as a traitor, and the prescription for treason is execution. So, either you win this or the crown's going to kill you. So that's what you're getting for joining in on the rebellion. The families of those fighting in the rebellion had quite a lot of work ahead of them as well. Some women joined their husbands, either supporting the army or fighting as well. We'll get to that bit a little bit later. For the most part, they stayed home and supported the war effort as best they could, which was also important. Northern women tried to increase cloth production. Southern women would plant crops because the clothing that the way it's usually said is, oh, the American soldiers didn't have uniforms. That's does not express how bad things were. That implies, oh, they didn't have like proper matching uniforms like an army. No, they didn't have clothes, hardly. Again, most of these clothes back then were made out of linen, which comes from flax, which is a very rough, very, I don't know if I'd say fragile material, but it wears out. It's not nearly, compared to cotton, it's like wearing paper, relatively speaking. Like if you had been wearing this stuff all your life and then you got like a cotton shirt or jeans, it would be like you had space age clothes. It'd be like, what is this magic that I've been given? And so in their flax clothing, marching up and down, engaging in battles, running from battles oftentimes, their clothes were just falling off of them. And also they often didn't have shoes, because their shoes were not especially strong, and especially up in the north, it got cold. And if you don't have shoes in the snow, your feet are gonna fall off. Like all your little toes are gonna freeze and fall off, and then you're gonna lose your feet, and you're just gonna die. So yeah, it was bad news. And as far as the southern women planting crops, you always need food. An army runs on its stomach, as they say, and when you're moving all these folks up and down the coast, you need to be able to keep them supplied. So one particular woman, Mary Freyer of Chester County, Pennsylvania, collected clothes and sent them to nearby troops because, again, they were without. So she collected clothes that her neighbors were donating and fixed them up as best she could and then sent them to the nearby troops. We also had Phyllis Wheatley of Boston. She was a freed slave that learned to read and write. If I recall correctly, that was like kind of it was her own impetus for this. Oh no, her owners did teach her to read and write. But then she published a collection of poems, wrote many to George Washington, urging him to recognize Africans as children of God because, there was this whole, we're fighting for freedom and independence. Meanwhile, they still hold slaves. And what's up with that, guys? A number of free blacks did work with the rebellion. Most in the South remained enslaved because if you're going to give people guns and have them fight with you, it's going to be really hard to ask them to give the guns back and go back to being slaves. So they just did their best to keep them enslaved in the South. Those who had a choice, though, typically joined the British because the British actually gave them the option of, hey, you join up and we'll give you freedom. Whereas those who joined the rebellion, were already freed, so they weren't fighting for their freedom. A lot of times they did have this idea of we're fighting for a future that will allow freedom, even if it was not necessarily explicitly stated. So here we have your typical colonial household. I've mentioned before how big these hearths are. Where's my mouse at? Here you are. These massive hearths with multiple fires burning so you can cook things at different temperatures. The children that you have to keep away from the hearths because, children are suicidal little gremlins that will just run into flames. The eternal task of spinning thread and churning butter, and then actually getting things done here, doing basic cooking, because these things never end. This at least you can get done in the course of a day. Here is a collection of poems from Phyllis Wheatley. Not sure I'm too happy with the name. Phyllis Wheatley Chooses Freedom. It's like she just decided, oh, you know what? I don't like being a slave anymore. It's like, That's not quite how that works. Or, I mean, I do get like it's got multiple meanings. She chooses the revolution and like their stance of freedom. It's like, okay, yeah, but that stance of freedom didn't apply to her. She just happened to have been free because she was in Boston, and the people in Boston didn't really need slaves. And also, she supported the revolution because she kind of had to. You couldn't jump on a boat and go with the British in Boston like you could in Virginia, because Virginia was largely under Loyalist control. So yeah, this feels a little disingenuous, but not her, but the book. I mean, saying she did what she could with the opportunity she was given. But like making her out to be this propaganda for the American Revolution as like, oh, she believed in the ideals of freedom. It's like, yeah, but the American Revolution didn't believe in the ideals of freedom that she was looking for. So anyway, early in the war, the British were beating the crap out of the American troops. After Washington tried to move out of Boston, there was the issue of the soldiers remaining very, I think balkanized would be a good word, but that's kind of specific. They were very factionalized. The soldiers from Boston believed that New York men should be defending New York, and therefore they shouldn't have to go and fight to defend New York. And this is where George Washington's main strength comes in, is keeping these men together when they don't want to be there. Once again, as I said, he wasn't great at winning battles, but he was pretty good at keeping his men from just up and leaving, which is what we needed then. Because after the Declaration, General Howe moved into the Hudson Valley to cut off New York and New England from the rest of the colonies, along with his, I was going to say regiment, but that implies a specific amount. There were a number of Hessian troops along with the British, and those are basically German mercenaries. Hessians are German mercenaries. This again goes back to Sleepy Hollow, the Headless Horseman is specifically said to be a Hessian. But again, if you read that without any context, it's like, what in the hell are they talking about? What is a Hessian? It's a German mercenary. And they're specifically known to be really good soldiers, because, I mean, they're German. Even back in the 1700s, they were known to be pretty tough. Also, the British Navy was there because, I mean, it's New York, it's Long Island, so the water's right there. So the British Navy is just hanging out and shelling the American positions, which is being run by Admiral Richard Howe, which same last name as General Howe, so I don't know if they're like brothers or cousins, but I mean, nepotism in the English Army, who would have guessed? But the end result was the Continental forces were pushed back from Long Island, and soon even Fort Lee in New Jersey was under British control, and then they even hit Fort Washington north of New York City. The British were rolling over the American troops. Just battle after battle, fort after fort was falling under British control. It got so bad that the Continental Congress fled from Philadelphia to Baltimore because with New Jersey taken, it wouldn't be much for the British to march on Philadelphia and potentially capture the Continental Congress, who were more or less, kind of unofficially, our like leading political body. However, we got lucky because, well, we were getting our asses kicked so badly that General Howe decided to take a breather. And he decided that the best way to end this war was by focusing on the army, wearing it down, eventually defeating the army entirely, and then having the colonies plead for peace, which would mean that there wouldn't be any kind of like military power left in the colonies to continue fighting even after peace was declared, because that always happens. But also, he wouldn't have to go through and like burn down towns and cause resentment among the colonies and result in yet more. I mean, again, Britain's been fighting Ireland for like 500 years by this point. They know about pissing off the population and never getting them to settle back down. So he was trying to avoid that. It's like, well, if we just fight the army and defeat the army, and then the people are like, okay, well, we can't keep fighting because the army's gone, so we surrender, then the war's over. Like, we haven't burned down any cities, we haven't murdered a bunch of civilians. That's about as good as the war can go. So here is the campaign in New York. Here the red is the British, whereas the that's black. No, blue. The black is just the city. So that really dark blue that almost looks black is American. Well, it's just a retreat. It's just one big retreat by American troops getting pushed back by the British into, well, there's the Hessians, by the way. You can tell because they've got these big fancy hats, and if the hat's fallen off, they've got these mustaches, which is very, very common among the Hessians at the time. So yeah, they piled onto Fort Washington, completely overwhelmed it. I mean, they even had bombardment begin at like 7 a.m., just had it completely surrounded. Washington and his boys escaped across the Hudson River to Fort Lee, which was then hit by yet more British troops, and then they had to retreat yet further out of New Jersey. So it was just one long fighting retreat out of New York and New Jersey. Wasn't great. Wasn't great for our boys. So, where does that leave us? Well, between July of 1776 and December, we hadn't gotten a single victory. We had, Bunker Hill, which wasn't actually a victory, but it was, a morale thing for us. We did push the British out of Boston, so that was nice. But after that, we've been getting beat black and blue. However, again, Howe didn't consider us a major threat, so he did the old European thing and decided to sit out winter. This is something that's gone back, hell, to the Greeks, where, hey, it's wintertime, we're taking the winter off. We're going to go to our forts, we're going to bring supplies in, get our troops fed, get our troops healed up, repair any, equipment damage we've got, and just wait for the spring, because nobody likes fighting in the winter. That winter sucks. You don't want to be stomping around in the snow. And, I mean, not that the British were without shoes like the American forces were, but you still don't want to stomp around in the snow and try to fight. Your hands are going to get cold, for one. So the Continental forces were able to regroup, repair, recruit, return to getting their butts kicked numbers. But it was still bad news because they were in eastern Pennsylvania. They were camped out in Valley Forge, and it's cold there. I mean, they're in. Well, they were not quite New England. They're in Pennsylvania, but it's cold up there. It's snowing a lot, and as I said, their shoes are often non-existent. Their clothes are falling apart. Their supplies are all but non-existent. They aren't doing well. But they discovered something. Right across the Delaware River was a Hessian camp in Trenton, New Jersey. So, in the famous crossing of the Delaware, Washington and 2,500 troops crossed over and hit the Hessian camp on Christmas Eve. Now, a couple of things about this. I'll show you in a minute how dangerous crossing the Delaware was. But also, like, when you take the winter off, The Hessians were drunk. This was Christmas Eve. They were having a great time. So this wasn't so much a battle as it was shooting a bunch of drunk Germans who had no idea what was happening. Now this is seen as this great strategic victory by Washington, which, I mean, it was very important, especially because it led to Washington taking Princeton and pushing the British troops actually completely out of New Jersey. But had this gone the other way, had the British swooped in and hit the Americans during this, taking the winter off, it would have been like, oh, the British were cowardly and did this sneak attack. So, it depends on who you're looking at. I'm not trying to be pro-British here. I'm just trying to be realistic as to, who we're looking at, because I remember I was in high school once, and I remember everything the Americans did was great and heroic and honorable, and everything the British did was dirty and underhanded and evil. It's like, guys, this isn't a Disney movie. This is a war. So the Continental Congress returned to Philadelphia because, well, New Jersey was now back under American control, and it was a buffer zone between New York and Philadelphia. And while New York would stay under British control until pretty much the end of the war, we at least now had distance between what was essentially our capital. Why is there a gnat in here? And where the British stronghold was. Also, it showed that this was not going to be a quick and easy war. Now, the Americans had kind of fooled themselves into thinking, oh, well, we did such a good job with Bunker Hill. We didn't win it, but they were barely organized, and they were able to really hurt the British. So if we organize, maybe we can just kick the British out and be done. And that sort of happened with Boston. Like, they organized, and they brought some cannons in. They were able to kick the British out, hardly any problem. But then it showed that, yeah, this isn't going to be an easy war. The British know how to fight. But this turnaround shows that the Americans also know how to fight. So even for the British, this isn't going to be an easy war. So when it comes across in the Delaware, there is this famous image, which again is very likely not super accurate. But what is accurate about this image is all this ice. Because during the winter, the rivers up north get full of ice. I've seen this once now. I took a train up to visit my friend in Wisconsin, and I was crossing, I think it was one of the rivers in Chicago, and the river was full of ice like this. And it was, we were on a, modern bridge way away from the actual water, but it was still kind of terrifying. These chunks of ice will shatter a modern boat. So these little wooden tubs stood no chance. So that's why you've got these guys. I need to stop pointing with my pen. Because this is online. Because you've got the guy with the oars, but everybody else has like these poles to push the ice away from the boats. This guy's got his foot out pushing this ice away from the boat. Because if it hits this boat, everybody in here is dead. Because you hit this water, you're getting hypothermia within moments. Yeah, the water's below freezing. Because all this ice. If you don't die from hypothermia, you're going to get crushed by the ice. Also, worse than this are these poor bastards that have the horses on the boat. Because not only do horses not like being on boats, but all this ice crashing together. If you've never seen a video of like rivers that are frozen and the ice is moving, it makes sounds similar to gunshots. Like that ice moving and crashing and crunching and cracking, it makes a lot of noise. So, really easy to sneak across because it's making a ton of noise. Your guys could be having a party and the Hessians wouldn't hear you. But also horrifically dangerous. This very easily could have been the end of Washington and all his boys because this was extremely dangerous. It's not reported if any guys got lost because of this. I imagine somebody had to have died in this crossing, just due to the sheer weight of ice on the river and the amount of boats they had out there, and just the fact that this is as much of a boat as they had. Yeah, this was a dangerous trip. And no, they were not standing all heroic like this. They were hunkered down in their boat, pushing ice away from them so they wouldn't die. Here's the after battle with the Hessians, which is to say shooting a bunch of drunk Germans. And then there's this other like really famous battle of Princeton where they pushed the British out of Princeton. There's a lot going on here. Oftentimes you'll get this part of the image zoomed in where it's Washington leading his men all heroic like with the smoke behind him. But you've also got a bunch of weird stuff happening. This dude's been shot. This guy's trying to stab this guy, but he stabbed the horse instead. I don't know what's happening there. This guy's getting shanked. There's a lot happening. Also, they're behind the cannon, so it implies that they have breached the British cannon line, which is a hell of a thing. So yeah, it's a very busy picture. All right, let's get a little further along. Yeah, and then we'll be caught up and y'all can leave. All right. So after all of this, the British got back into gear and began moving to be a little more aggressive. General Howe decided to force the end of the war more quickly by taking Philadelphia and thus forcing the Continental forces to surrender. Because, basic European Warfare 101, you take their capital, they have to surrender. That's just like the rules. You take their capital where their leader is, and that's the end of the war. That's just how it works. That's why most countries in Europe, their capital's like in the middle of the country, so that any attack from the borders have to go all the way in to get to the capital. England doesn't really count because they've got the water around them, and they've been really good about keeping invaders out. Also, Washington couldn't do anything about it. Like Washington had the largest military force among the various continental generals, and his army was too small to do anything more than just like delay Howe's force. That's how much bigger the British military was than ours. Washington could only like strike from the flank, fight long enough for the British to actually turn and get ready to fight for real, and then they had to get out of there or they would be completely destroyed. So yeah, it was not good. It was just a matter of time, and Philadelphia was going to be taken. While this was going on, General John Burgoyne, another British general, made his way up to Fort Ticonderoga and recaptured it by July 7th. But apparently some wires got crossed as to who's doing what. And General Howe was supposed to go up and help reinforce him. Because if you take a fortified position, you're going to take losses. That's just going to happen. Because you're going up against guys that are dug in, they've got defenses, they've typically got cannons, and you've got to overwhelm them, typically in just masses of bodies, in order to take their position. And then by the time you take it, they've used up all their supplies, so you're not taking a location with supplies, you're taking a location that's been completely depleted. So they needed reinforcements to help them hold it and to relieve them so they can go and get resupplied. However, Howe was too far along, too far south to do anything about it. Again, Ticonderoga is like way up in, I want to say northern New York State, like almost to the Canadian border, and Philadelphia is not. Philadelphia is like, well, almost at the Mason-Dixon line. So Howe continued heading south. He captured Philadelphia in September. The Continental Congress had already escaped again, so it's not like he actually captured what government we had. But he did capture Philadelphia, which was a pretty big deal morale-wise. However, while this was going on, General Barry St. Ledger, who was another British general, who was also supposed to go up and support Burgoyne, made his way across New York State. Joseph Brant and his sister Molly, who were both, the Mohawk leaders, were gathering native forces, so they were gathering power in northern New York State. So this is where things start happening. At Orskany, there were German-American farmers led by General Nicholas Herkimer, who managed to keep the British hold off the British and let General Arnold get to Fort Stanwix to push the British back. So rather than allowing, I believe this was specifically Barry St. Ledger to reconvene with Burgoyne, they were able to hold him off so that General Arnold and I think it was I've got it on the map. Another general that the book doesn't mention, eventually led to the Battle of Saratoga. Burgoyne was by himself, so all of his support that was supposed to have gone up to help him was either somewhere else, had been held off by other guys. Gates, that's him, Horatio Gates. So it was Burgoyne versus the Green Mountain Boys, Horatio Gates, Benedict Arnold, and their Oneida allies, which eventually led to Burgoyne being crushed at Freeman's Farm and suffering double the casualties of the Continental forces. So while Howe did take Philadelphia, and that was a major, morale blow to the Continentals, the Battle of Saratoga was a stand-up fight. This was a army versus army, just shooting the crap out of each other. But the Continentals had, I guess, better tactics. They were able to just surround Burgoyne, and as I said here, they held off St. Ledger. They were also able to, I think I might have, again, you've got how he made his way south to hit Philadelphia, so he wasn't able to help Burgoyne. St. Ledger's over here. Clinton's coming up from New York, which led to this. Herkimer stopped St. Ledger. Gates and Arnold went up to hit Burgoyne at Saratoga, and this was the big battle. And the importance behind this is coming up, I promise. We're probably not going to be able to get to it today, but Saratoga is this extremely important battle for the future of the Revolution. Even if, strategically, it just meant that we pushed the British out of, really, northern New York back into Canada, which was important. It was good that they're not in the States anymore, or, the colonies anymore. But, we'll get to it. It's very important. So here's some British getting mowed down, as I always like to put forward. Some terrible jobs to have in the British Army. The drummer, you can't shoot back. The guy with the flag, you're just a target. Now, granted, you are important for morale, the drum and the flag to rally around. But I'd hate to be that guy. I mean, again, as I said, as effective as the muskets were, you were as likely to hit somebody with a musket as you were with that drum. So, I believe this is the surrender, not technically at Saratoga, at Freeman's Farm, but of Burgoyne. All right. Let's get a little further, and I think we'll be set. So, we already talked about Valley Forge a little bit. This is where the Continental Army were stationed in eastern Pennsylvania. And despite the fact that they had won some major victories, the winter will still kill you. The winter doesn't care how good you're doing in the war. It will still kill you. It was cold. They had lack of supplies, lack of food, lack of clothing. Again, I have harped on this a lot already, but just FYI, this is where it's all coming to a head. And discipline was falling. And by discipline falling, I mean people were leaving. If you're in a camp, in an army where you're seeing your buddies literally freezing to death, and you've got the option to just leave and go home, a lot of people took that option. However, they brought volunteers from Europe to help out because, as is the eternal wisdom, if you hate the British, then there's a lot of people that like you, because a lot of people hate the British. So, we had a whole bunch of folks here. The Prussian Baron Friedrich von Steuben, who was recruited specifically by Benjamin Franklin, so you know he's top tier. the French general Marquis de Lafayette. Lafayette was, I would argue, as important to the winning of the war as Washington was. He was there for like all the major battles post Saratoga. He was, and again, I'm not trying to be like, oh, Washington sucked, but like he was a better general than Washington in terms of tactics. Again, Washington was great at keeping his men there, which is as important as the tactics part. But Lafayette was a tactician general. And also he had like troops and supplies from France, which is a peer nation to England. And then actually after this was all done, he went back to France and helped France with their revolution when they had their thing happen. So Lafayette's a hell of a guy. We also had the Bavarian Johann Baron de Kalb and the Poles Thaddeus Kosciuszko and Casimir Count Pulaski. You don't need to know most of these guys, but definitely keep Lafayette in mind because, well, he's going to come up a lot. Anyway, they all helped out with recruiting, discipline, wages, supplies, because as you can kind of tell from a lot of these names, they're rich upper class people. They're nobles. And they have access to a lot of material and a lot of supplies and a lot of money. And hell, a lot of them had their own troops. And they were more than happy to join in and help to fight the British because they hate the British. When it came to the home front, as we've already said to some degree, when the tides of war changed, women had to often flee. But there were those that went with the troops. And those that were with the troops had to deal with the same lack of supplies as the men because, I mean, you know, if you don't have supplies, nobody gets supplies. It's not like, well, we don't have supplies, but we have this extra stash of supplies for the women because, you know, it's the 1700s. We got to help the women out. You don't have supplies, you don't have supplies. Period. Now, some women did do quite a lot for the war. Some served as spies, others as couriers, which is to say, you know, moving letters back and forth for either side, because, again, this is the 1700s, and they didn't think women could use their brains, or that they even had brains. So, like, oh, this woman's there's this woman in the room while we're talking about really important matters. Oh, it's okay. Don't worry about it. She's not going to. Yeah, it's fine. Or like, oh, there's this woman coming into, you know, or she's going through this, like, you know, military encampment. It's all right. She's just a woman. She's probably just, like, delivering food or whatever. Yeah. Yeah. Relax, guys. For example, we have a couple of individuals here, and this is where I often like to pull from for examples for the final paper, if you guys want to use this. Lydia Dara. British officers occupied her home. This was very common, where the British officers would just come in and be like, hey, we're going to use your home because a lot of these people had nice homes. We're going to use your home as a temporary headquarters. Feed us now. That's just what they did. So these British officers occupying her home, while she's in the room, are openly talking about, like, their plans to capture Washington and, like, how they know where he is and when they're going to capture him. And I don't remember if she knew Washington. Let me see. No. It doesn't say. I can't remember from my other notes if she knew Washington personally or if she like knew a guy who worked with Washington. So she like was very close to Washington. And so she hears these guys like, "Oh yeah, we know where he's camped. We know like his movements, and we're going to capture him." And she's like, "Oh, I need to step out for a minute," and they're not going to say anything. So she heads out and lets Washington know, "Hey, by the way, these British guys are going to capture you." So he changed his routine and beefed up the security and managed to avoid capture because of just a woman. We had Nancy Hart Morgan lured some British soldiers in to dinner. This is, again, similar to with Lydia Darrow, where it's like, oh, well, British soldiers can just come in and take whatever they want. You woman, cook for us because that's all you know how to do. While they were having dinner, she hid their guns, shot 2 of them, and then the neighbors came and hanged the rest. So, yeah, they had a great time. We also had Margaret Corbin. So this is, I'm going to give a little bit of background here. There was this mythical figure known as Molly Pitcher, like a pitcher you carry water in. Because like on the front lines in these battles, when you're shooting the muskets or especially firing the cannons, there's going to be a lot of heat building up. And after a couple of hours of this, soldiers would just flat out pass out from heat exhaustion or dehydration, just from all the heat building up from the weapons. So there will be women, not necessarily wives of the soldiers, but like camp followers. This has been a thing since before, I'm pretty sure before. But women who like would just aid in just whatever needed to be done around the military camp. And they would bring pitchers of water to the front lines to keep the guys from passing out. And they were known as just collectively Molly Pitcher, just this collective person. So Margaret Corbin was one of these Molly Pitchers, and she was bringing water to her husband. He was, I don't know if he was like hit by shrapnel or he fell from dehydration and heat exhaustion. Either way, he was unable to continue doing his duties. So instead of like dragging him back to the back lines, she took his place on the battlefield and loaded and fired cannons at the British, which is awesome. But we have yet one more badass, and it's my favorite, Deborah Sampson. She just went straight up Mulan. She just disguised herself as a man, fought as a soldier for, I don't remember if the book said so. No, it just says they disguised themselves as men and enlisted as soldiers. I don't remember quite how long she fought for. She was eventually injured, and then when they went in to pull the shrapnel out of her side, they're like, "Oh wait, this is a woman." But she had fought so long in the war, and I think she was a captain when she was discharged. Like, she wasn't just some soldier. She had been doing really well in the war. So they were technically like, well, okay, you can't be here because you're a woman, but also you've done all this. So what we're going to do is you're going to be honorably discharged, because if you're injured in war and you can't fight because of your injury, you're let out of the army honorably, it's honorable discharge, and therefore you're still given like a stipend or whatever. So she was honorably discharged due to injury rather than kicked out because she was a woman. Although also technically she couldn't be in the army because she was a woman, but they're like, well, we're just going to do the honorable discharge thing. But also, just to add to this, So she goes back to being a civilian, gets married, has kids. She dies sometime later, and her husband actually petitioned Congress for veteran benefits, because if, as a lot of women were after the war, if your husband was in the military, specifically in the Revolutionary War in this case, and died later, whatever veteran benefits he was getting, you would be able to get as the widow. That was just how it worked. I mean, that's how it still works today. You know, VA benefits go to the surviving members of the family. And this had never been a thing where, you know, a woman was in the military and the husband would get the benefits like that. But he was taking care of the kids. So Congress was like, yeah, well, sure. And they gave it to him. So Deborah Sampson was breaking all kinds of stereotypes even after her death. So, yeah, she was great. So let's see. Here is Valley Forge. Very cold. Very not a great place to be if your clothes aren't quite together. There's The Boys from Europe. Let's see. I think this one is the pole. No, there were two poles, right? So this is the. Oh, that's the Prussian, maybe. I'm pretty sure this is Lafayette, just based on how he's standing. I'm not sure about the others. These two might be the poles because they're dressed similarly. So here is Lydia Dara. They're just having a conversation about kidnapping Washington. And she's like, oh, how about that? I'm going to head out for a minute. Here is Nancy Hart Morgan inviting the British to dinner. Also, I think her daughter got involved as well. Like, you can see her daughter there behind her. I'm pretty sure, like, in the actual event, her daughter had the other gun. It was just like, yeah, this is short range. This works. Here is Margaret Corbin loading the cannons. And her husband, they're all boneless and flopped out on the floor. And Deborah Sampson. So yeah, good stuff. Now we do have there's still like a home front section before the next like big section, but it's 9:40. We'll end it there. So I'll see y'all next week. Based on how far we are through the chapter, I don't see the test being next week. So we might finish this chapter next Monday. Maybe. It would surprise me if we did. But then at earliest, that means the review will be on Wednesday. So test won't be next week for sure. But I don't know, man. We're still we're on slide 12 of 23. We still got a lot to go. So anyway, I'll see y'all later. Have a good weekend.